Hey, Jodi.
Hey, Amanda. How's
Hey,
it going?
I'm doing quite well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm great. It's
Fantastic.
Mother's Day, so I just had pancakes and bacon.
Happy Mother's Day, and happy Mother's Day to everybody out
Yes.
there as well.
Happy Mother's Day to all that have mothers, to all that are mothers, and to all that like to mother things in their lives.
Yes, yes. We're really excited to be back. We took a few weeks off from our live stream series, and we're excited to be back today to talk a little bit about piano and bass. So thanks for tuning in. For those of you who might be tuning in for the first time, my name is Amanda Tosoff. I'm a jazz pianist from Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
And my name is Jodi Proznick. I'm a bassist, composer, and educator out here in the West Coast, on the West Coast of Canada, in Vancouver, BC.
And today's number 14 of our live stream series we've been doing since September last year. Mm-hmm. And we've had some wonderful special guests, Celine Peterson, Sharantha Bedigay, Rini Rosnes, my childhood hero, pianist, great pianist from New York, and Lila Bialy, and so many more wonderful artists. So if you haven't seen our live streams before, go over to our YouTube, make sure to subscribe and check out some really wonderful, meaningful conversations. Today, it's Jodi and I. We're going to be talking, giving you guys our top 3 tips for jazz piano and jazz bassists. And we actually have a handout for this month. It's our freebie of the month to accompany this live stream. So you can go check it out on our website and see a whole bunch of freebies archive that you can check out later as well. But I'm super excited to talk about some piano and bass because we have a very special event coming up next week.
Yeah,
Jodi, do you want to talk about that?
Next weekend, I think this is webinar number maybe 5 or 6, maybe. We have a whole bunch that are still posted on the website. So you should just go to www.musicartscollective.com/workshops, and you'll see all of our previous workshops around improv and composition, rhythm, the rhythm section, all kinds of different things. But the awesome thing about what's coming up next weekend is that we're kind of focusing in on, our instruments. So it's there's 2 in one day. You can do both or you can do one. And we're having a beginning jazz piano with Amanda in the morning. And then in the afternoon, it will be how to create great bass lines. And both of us have a lot of step-by-step strategies that you can implement into your practice regimes right away that will really help you along your jazz journey on these instruments. And I would add too that, doing a piano course or the workshop with Amanda, no matter what instrument you play, is going to be beneficial for you. And I would say probably the same for the bassline workshop, because a lot of the principles on the bass are, apply to every single thing in music. So join us next weekend.
Absolutely.
And the other thing about it is we videotape the workshop. So if you can't make it on the day, you don't worry. It lives in our hub. You can access it through our portal. And we also will have some beautiful PDFs for you that you can utilize moving forward, that you can download and keep for your collection.
Fantastic. So shall we dive in to bass? I think Jodi's going to start us off.
Top 3 bass tips.
Yes. There we go.
All right, friends. So the top 3 tips, we wanted to give you some super easy, straightforward takeaways, these big ideas that you can run with today. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, which is really the number 1 for jazz bass players, is knowing your roots and knowing your fifths of every chord, especially when we're talking walking bass lines in a jazz style, in a swing style in particular. But quite honestly, it doesn't matter what kind of music you play, 9.9 times out of 10, we are in charge of the bottom note of a chord. So knowing what your roots are. So a really, really, really great thing to practice is just to take a look at a lead sheet or a chord progression and immediately just practice quarter notes with a big full sound in time and in tune. following the chord progression. So this is the first 4 measures of Autumn Leaves. And I have my metronome here. I have it set. And the other thing is to set different tempos. So depending on, you know, what tempo you're working on, you can play around with what tempo. But I have a nice medium tempo here. Here it is. It's at 100. I'm hoping you can hear that. Amanda, can you hear that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So that's at 100. So what I do is get my hand position. In this case, it's pretty lovely because all these chords live in the key of B flat major. So I set my hand position as if I'm in B flat major. Maybe I'll even play the scale just to kind of get my hand in position. And then I find the roots of each chord and just play the root on the downbeat, for example. So I'm going to count us off. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll repeat. Of course, if it's a tune, you can play the whole tune and move. So the number 1 tip is to find your roots, know your roots, and be able to play through an entire song, switching to the appropriate root at the appropriate time based on the chord progression. So next up, we're going to add the 5th of each chord. Now, this is a little bit trickier for those that are new to reading chord progressions. There's a couple of tricks of the trade on bass anyway. If you have your first finger on upright bass on the root, if you place your 4th finger on the string above, you get your 5th. So even if you aren't quite sure what that note is, you can always do it this way, right? Your hand will be your guide, and it will be for the rest of your career as a bass player for sure. So, but in this case, I'm going to use some open strings, and I know what my roots are. So let me put the metronome on, and we'll go count it off. 1, 2, 3, 4. So here's your root. 5, root, 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 5, root, root. And it gives a little bit of motion, right? A little bit of interest to your bass line. Again, watching my hand position, how it's beautifully not moving out of that B flat major hand position because all of those notes live in that parent scale. So it's also a really great way to kind of keep your hand in a nice solid position. That's how we play in tune without any frets on this thing, is our hand position is our guide. So understanding what the 5th is, the perfect 5th from each root is a fantastic thing to practice. And quite honestly, my friends, you know, if you do that and only that, you have done your job. That's pretty much all you need to do. All the other thirds and sevenths and chromatic approach tones and all the stuff we're going to go over on Sunday is just gravy. This is the subject and predicate of your sentence as a bass player. So having a really good handle and not focusing, in my experience, focus less on what notes to play and focus more on where you're putting them in time, playing with a nice, full, consistent sound, and also, and in tune, in time, with a nice, big, full sound, and you pretty much will be rocking it. So, and that don't take my word for it. That was a Ray Brown masterclass. I saw it many years ago at the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival, and it was full of us kids, and we were watching there, and he just kept saying roots and fifths, roots and fifths. That's your bread and butter, folks. Learn your roots and fifths. And I was like, got it. So moving on. So tip number 2 is to feel the grid. So again, our job as bass players in jazz music, but really any contemporary music, so this applies to anything, is to feel what I call the grid. You know, the grid when you're working online with or using your DAW or you know, you can actually see the grid. But as performing musicians, we have to feel the grid. The grid needs to be internalized. So you don't want to just play on the time. You want to play in the time. And the way to do that is to subdivide the quarter note. Now, this gets a little more subtle. I've kind of put it into there's 2 camps, and then there's a spectrum, of course. But really, there's playing our 8th note swung, and there's playing it straight 8ths. Straight 8ths tend to come easier because culturally, we hear straight 8 music all the time. That's pretty much the vast majority is based on taking the pulse and dividing it into groups of 2 or 4. In the case of swing, it's a little more subtle. We are actually dividing the quarter note into, depending on the tempo, it's triplets, but it's not triplet, 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 triplet. We're not emphasizing the downbeat. We're actually emphasizing the upbeat, and it's the third of the triplet. So that can get a little tricky for beginners to feel that. We all tend to rush our eighth notes. That's very typical. We all rush our eighth notes. So the question becomes, how do we not rush our eighth notes? And honestly, the answer to that, in my experience, is to be able to say the grid and play along with speaking a grid. This was the grid I came up with that seemed to work really well when I was working with a lot of students. In fact, it helped people play their eighth notes correctly in the swing style, which is to de-emphasize the downbeat, emphasize the upbeat. So I'm going to do a little on beat 1, because in this case, the metric accent, beat 1 is the most important in 4/4. So it's So you want to feel that 3, 4. I'll put the metronome on. 3. So we go So I'm just playing the first beat. And then what are we going to do to fill the rest with something, even if we're not playing it? And it's ooh, ba, 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 ooh, ba, 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 ooh, ba, 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 ba. Now, if you notice, this is where things get tricky. When people first start this, they go, ooh, ba, ooh, ba, ooh, ba, ooh, ba, and it's not ooga, ooga. It's ba, 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 Notice I'm barely saying the ooh. So one of the things you can practice to get the grid in your body is take any major scale and play this pattern. In this case, it's in C, I think. It's pretty small for me. Ba, 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 ba. Notice how I'm ba, ba. It kind of feels like an egg rolling down a hill. So one of the things to practice is don't even touch your instrument. In Vancouver, we have a lot of rain. So windshield wipers going, swish, swish, and you just say it out loud. Ba, 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 ba. You can actually try saying the grid along with your favorite jazz albums, right? Try saying it slow, do it fast, and speak the grid along with all the music you listen to, and try and what we call entrain or get connected to it. And then once you're able to do that and sort of internalize that grid, what ends up happening is even if I'm playing quarter notes, I'm still thinking, ba, 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 ba. And notice how it just helps me to put those quarter notes right where they want to be. Ba, 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 and the groove's still going even when I'm resting. So the grid, I can't, this is a helpful tip, friends. Very helpful. After 20 years of teaching jazz and bass, this one is a good one. If you buy into it, practice it in the shower. Walk down the street. All right. So the last thing, or actually a couple more things that I wanted to share. Oh, no, this is the third thing, right? It is the third thing. It's to stretch. So the number one issue I see technically with students, and it doesn't matter what age you are, and it doesn't matter where you are in your life, the number one challenge is your shoulders. Everybody's shoulders right now are rolled forward because we're all on our phones all the time. We're on our computers all the time. So it is an absolutely chronic issue of all of your pec muscles being tight and closed, overstretched in the back. And so when I ask students to lift their arms up, everyone's shoulders come up with the arms because they're not actually like loose in the shoulder joints. Now, the problem with this on double bass is that in order to get a nice relaxed hand position in your left hand, your shoulder needs to be soft back and down, and you need to be open in the chest. So some might say, oh no, what do we do? Well, there's some really good stretches that can help to create mobility in your shoulder joint and help to soften the shoulders. And the best one, and I love it because, I mean, I'm not going to be able to really do it for you right now because of the camera. I'm going to give you a little idea. It's going to be small, but basically I'll walk you through it. You take a patch cord or a scarf of some sort. If you have a yoga strap of some sort, and you put the strap in front of you and you hold it. Hopefully you can see it in my camera. You hold it in front of you like this with your arms straight and your wrists flat. And then what you do is you lift the strap over your head and then over to and into the back. I have to go over the base. You go into the back like this, and you notice I'm not bending my elbows, right? And I'm pulling out with my arms, and I'm rolling. As we get to the shoulder blades, you're going to feel some pulling in your arm probably, and you roll it through there like 2 or 3 times. This is going to feel so good. Oh my gosh. So good. You roll, 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 and then you bring the strap back to your bottom, and then you go the other way. You come back up, you roll, roll, roll. This feels so good right now, you guys. Oh my gosh. You do this every day, and then it comes over your head. I'm going to have to put over the base. And then relax. If you do that, even like, so right before a rehearsal, right before a practice session, 3 or 4 times, what it does is it opens up the shoulder blade, the whole mechanism, so that you're not engaging your shoulders while you're playing the bass. And if your shoulder is engaged, it's really difficult to get a nice gentle curve in your wrist. And this is a whole conversation about the physiology of playing bass. But basically, friends, you don't want to be breaking this wrist. The blood flow just gets impeded. The nerves get tight. So you want to have a nice, flat-ish, gentle curve in the wrist. And if your shoulder is forward, you cannot do this. You cannot do this. It's virtually impossible. Your elbow wants to come down. So you have to have this, I almost say it's like, butterfly wings, right? You have to imagine your arms are attached to the scapula at the very back of your back, and the shoulders aren't involved at all. They're just soft. And then you have all this power that's coming from the back, right? But if your shoulders are glued, it's impossible to do that. You'll just be using your hands and your lower arm, and that's all you'll have for power. And we want to use our back and our hips and our feet, right? That's where the power comes from when you're playing bass. So stretch, 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 do that stretch. I promise you, you'll start sitting taller, you'll stand taller, your shoulders will be soft, you'll be less sore in your arms, you'll be less tight when you play. And I can't overemphasize this enough. And anyone who studied with me know that like the first 6 months is just like, are you doing your stretches? Here's a new stretch. Let's do this stretch. Yay. So that's awesome. Okay. And that's it. Those are my 3 tips. So root tips, learn the grid, and stretch your body. Take deep breaths. And remember that music is fun. And drink lots of water. That's the jazz mom. I'm jazz mom today. Those are my jazz mom tips.
Those are some pretty awesome tips, Jodi. I'm going to do that stretch after this.
Do the stretch. Oh, it's good for everyone. Anyone who plays music into this is where we carry so much in our shoulders. So yeah, love that body. We're like athletes, fine motor athletes. You have to treat your body like the beautiful art piece it is. So the music comes from there. Yeah, so great.
Yeah. Wonderful.
All right, next up.
Yes. And so all of those tips were so fantastic. And like you said, I think they apply to any instrument, definitely piano. I mean, pianists have to sometimes play bass lines, not with bass players at the same time. Usually we get dirty looks if we do that. But so yeah, I'm going to talk about the top 3 tips that I give my piano students. So here are the top 3 tips. So like Jodi mentioned, roots and fifths, the foundational notes of the chord, those are really important to know as a pianist as well. But also thirds and sevenths are really, really key to pretty much all our voicings that we play. The thirds and sevenths are kind of like the branches. So I guess the roots are like the roots of the tree. And then you have the thirds and sevenths. They're kind of like the branches. They give that tree its form, its shape, its quality, its chord quality, and provide support for all the different colors that you can add to chords, like nines, 13s, all the extensions, all those beautiful sounds that we love in jazz. So we really got to know those thirds and sevens inside and out. And you can play them in the left hand or the right hand if you're playing a bass line. They're really, really great for comping when you're playing a melody or comping when you're soloing, especially because we're often so focused on our right hand that we got to have just some nice, easy stuff to grab in our left hand. So thirds and sevens are really important to know. Here's an example from the same progression that Jodi was looking at from the first 3 chords of Autumn Leaves. And one little tip I like to give all my students when we're starting is when you see all these higher numbers, 9s, 13s, 11s, ignore them. Just, replace the number with the 7 and learn what the basic 4-part chord is. And once you know those notes, write them out and you'll see the 3rd and the 7 there. And you can go through a progression and organize those 3rds and 7s so that you're not leaping from chord to chord. You might have to sometimes reverse the order of them to voice lead through a progression. So you can see here in the slides, we have the 3rd and 7 of C minor, and then the 7 and 3 of F7, because I flipped it around so I didn't jump. Oh, thanks for those support notes, Jodi.
I'm gonna play the bass note for you.
Yes, I love it. Okay, and then we have the 3rd and 7 of B flat. And this is about as low as you want to go, by the way. That middle line is usually about as low as you want to go for this style of voicing. So 3rds and 7s, really no lower usually than that D, or maybe as high as E above middle C. It's starting to get high and in right hand range by then. So yeah, know those 3rds and 7s, and then... Oh, thanks, Jodi. I'll do a little more out of time. Then you can improvise. So you've got some nice left hand shapes that aren't moving very far. They support the chord, and they're really, really useful because once you know them in the left hand, you can add other beautiful notes to create these bigger, I shouldn't say they're more exciting. We want to use different, we want to use small voicings, we want to use big voicings, but they definitely are the foundational stuff you got to know. So just like Jodi said with roots and fives, you got to know your 3rds and 7s before you start adding fancy notes in there.
We should come up with a jingle. No, your 3rds and 7s.
Yes.
No, your roots and fifths. Yeah.
Yes. Super, super important. And we're going to talk about that on Sunday as well in more detail, how we can use them and how we can build on them to create lots of really wonderful voicings. So yes, know your 3rds and 7s and your roots and fives first. So the next thing is dat versus dit. Okay, so one of the things that I see a lot with my students, especially if they've had a lot of classical training, is that when they play short notes, they play them really staccato because that's what they're used to. And I usually have to get my students to say how short sounds in swing rhythms, how short sounds sound, and that's more like a dat. It's like a fatter short note. So we don't want to hear dit for a short note, we want to hear dat. And I'll just demonstrate what that sounds like. So a dit sort of sound, a real staccato sound, is kind of clipped and the voicings sound nice, but they're really short. So we want them to be a little fatter, more like dat. So dat, 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 dat. So, and we don't always want to accent them like too heavy. Once in a while, we might want to, more of an accent. Maybe some long notes as well. Once in a while. But when you're comping, you want to be mindful to not overdo it and you want to be listening to what's going on behind you. But the main point here being, don't play your short notes too short. Think DAT, and like Jodi said, say your rhythms. Try to sort of, as you're playing your chords, or anything, try to make sure your short notes sound like DAT. So again, this Charleston rhythm, DAT, 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 right? Versus DIT. So that's a big one that I find I'm working on with my students a lot. And the last one has to do with the body. And I have to admit that I have had poor posture over the years. And like Jodi said, a lot of the times we're slouching over and we need to be, making sure our shoulder blades are pinched together, but not overarching your back, which is a tendency we'll do when we try to put our shoulder blades in line and together. We'll start, overextending. So but yeah, keeping your shoulder blades back, because then you're going to have, like Jodi said, you're using more of your back. You're not relying on the rotator cuff and various shoulder muscles that can get really fatigued if they're, doing all the work. So at the piano, the same thing. You want to make sure that your shoulder blades are back. You're not arching, that you're sitting on your sit bones, and that you're in a proper piano bench, not a chair like I am in today. But you're sitting on your sit bones, almost ready that at any time you could just stand up and be, jump up. So on your sit bones, 90-degree angles. So your legs are in front of you in about 90-degree angles. Your arms are almost a 90-degree angle, not quite, and they're not too close to your sides. So you want to again sort of be in a natural position, watching your posture and sitting properly, and that's super key to not having issues develop from the many hours you can spend at the piano, especially when you're improvising. It's really hard to focus on these things. So make sure you're doing that in your practice. And I highly recommend getting a mirror and putting that next to your piano, or videotaping yourself to see how you're sitting so you can monitor that. So those are my 3 tips. Know your thirds and sevens. Be able to play more like DAT versus DIT when you play short notes, and also watch your posture. And really, I think that all of the stuff we talked about, like we said, applies to any instrument. Yeah. So know your fifths, feel the grid, stretch, know your thirds and sevens, play DAT versus DIT, work on your rhythm, and watch your posture. Awesome. Those are my 3 tips.
Yay.
Absolutely. And I'm really, really excited to talk more about this next week. This is my favorite topic, piano.
Yes, and making bass lines are totally my favorite topic too. It's fun. It's very fun.
Absolutely. So yeah, hopefully you guys found that helpful, that little tutorial. We do have a freebie of the month that we do. We have a handout that goes along with this, so you can go check out our examples that we showed today are in the handout. And we also have an archive of lots of great baseline stuff, actually, and comping stuff as well. So you can go check that out. And hopefully join us next week for our upcoming workshops.
Yes. It's an hour and a half live. And like we said, if you have to nip in and out, or if you can't come on the day, you will be able to access all of this online for a period to come, and it's going to be really fun. We really enjoy this, and we spend a lot of time working on this. And like I said, you will get a beautiful PDF that you can take away with you and practice from. That will give you lots of the information as well. So.
Absolutely. So yes, please follow us. Please check out our website. And thanks for tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Absolutely. And so nice to see you, Jodi.
Nice to see you, my friend.
Thanks for sharing your tips.
Oh, thanks for your tips. They are great. Super great. So,
okay,
take care, everybody. And maybe we'll see you next Sunday in the webinar. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye.
Happy Mother's Day.